All right, welcome back, AP Lang students, to this rhetorical adventure. I I watched a little bit of the video, and I apologize for the video quality. It's not. I mean, this is Zoom. I'm doing Zoom, but maybe it makes it better. I don't know. I don't know if you want to see me in high definition. Henry is still hanging out on his little tree. They're judging me. Day 2. All right, second video lesson. I'm going to share my screen. We'll get started. This video will be much shorter than the first video. That one had a lot. I had to go sit down for a while and think about things after that video. This one, much shorter. Okay, here we go. Day 2. Boot camp for AP Lang. What is the most difficult aspect of arguing? So building an argument, terms for argumentation, writing persuasive papers, argumentative papers. What's the difference between persuasive and argumentative? We'll talk about those things. We will be doing some arguing throughout the year, building our writing skills to write effective arguments. With that in mind, I want you to just think, what is the most difficult aspect of arguing? One thing I used to do probably the first 2 years I taught English, we would work on argumentative research papers. I would have kind of your run-of-the-mill basic standard topics that usually students would have pretty strong opinions over. They would tell me their opinions and what side of the argument they would want to be on, and then they would have to write the paper on the opposite side, arguing for the thing that they did not believe. They were very unhappy. I stopped doing that. But it is a practical skill. It is something that is very helpful because you see the perspective of the other side of the argument. And I would say for me personally, that's one of the most difficult aspects of arguing is we get so personal, we get so emotionally involved and invested that we can become blind to the opposing side and their views and their arguments and the issues with those arguments. Today we're going to talk about some rhetorical terms for argumentation, so things that you would use in a debate or in an argumentative research paper or in a persuasive paper. For those going into politics, potentially you will probably use some of these terms. Many other fields and careers also will use these terms. We're going to start with Aristotle, the man, the myth, the legend, and rhetoric, just briefly talk about who he was, and then we'll have some rhetorical appeals. We'll dive into those in a little bit more depth. I know we talked about them briefly yesterday. We'll dive into them more in depth today, and then those terms. We only have 8 terms for today. Okay, Aristotle, on rhetoric. Look at that. Look at that stoic face, that beard, the hair. It's a look. I think we should bring it back, that and togas. Why is he important? Why are we talking about Aristotle in AP Lang and Comp? Well, Aristotle, he lived from 384 to 322 BC, so not a long life. He was an ancient Greek philosopher and polymath, one of the most influential intellectuals in Western history. The reason why we're talking about him, well, he was the first to define rhetoric, to label it, first to identify and categorize those 3 primary means of persuasion, those rhetorical appeals. He emphasized the value of the rhetorical situation, which we talked about in the last video, and we'll talk about throughout the semester and year, in the art of persuasion. We are learning the framework that he created nearly 2,400 years ago. We're still applying it. We're still using it. We're still talking about it, still breaking it down, analyzing it, and then using it to create something new. Real fast. So Aristotle, it's Aristotle. Whenever I see Aristotle, I think Chipotle. There's no valid reason why, outside of they look like they're spelled the same. I'm just thinking out loud now. Okay, Plato. So Aristotle was the student in ancient Greece of Plato. This is Plato. Look at these guys. Look at that face. Plato taught Aristotle, and Aristotle went on to become probably Plato's most successful student. Plato, and when you talk about the rhetorical appeals, ethos, logos, and pathos, Plato thought, no, you shouldn't use ethos, you shouldn't use pathos, You should just use logos. You should just use logic and reason. That's the only thing we should ever use in any sort of argument, any sort of persuasion, is just the facts. And I think there's a valid argument with that. Aristotle, though, believed that people inevitably will use those other means, those other appeals, ethos and pathos, inevitably, that they will use those in argument to get something that they really want. And so it's better to learn about them and to learn how to master them than to simply ignore them and act like they're not there or not allow them, because then somebody else would use them and win an argument. You see those appeals used positively and negatively all over, advertisements, politics, and we'll break those examples down many, many times throughout this class. Okay, so that's a little bit about Aristotle, who he was. He basically he created the framework of rhetoric that we are learning about now. I just pulled a couple of quotes. When I was looking up stuff about Aristotle, I didn't realize how many quotes were attributed to him. I have three of my favorites. Love is composed of a single soul inhabiting two bodies. That's a great quote. There is no great genius without some touch of madness. Another great quote. This one probably is my favorite as a teacher. The educated differ from the uneducated as much as the living differ from the dead. I believe that to be true. Education is profoundly significant. In this time, if you have time, I would love for you just to simply Google Aristotle quotes. Look up some quotes that you feel like resonate to you, that you find interesting, that you agree with, maybe some that you disagree with, just to kind of maybe bridge a connection or make some of what Aristotle taught a little bit more relatable, considering he lived so long ago. Back to why we're talking about this gentleman, this Greek philosopher, Aristotle. Well, rhetoric, this is a quote that he said, rhetoric is the art of observing in any given case the available means of persuasion. In any given case, the available means of persuasion. Rhetoric is the art of observing in any given case the available means of persuasion. And that's what we're trying to do in this class. We're learning how to do that, how to observe. What does any given case mean? How is persuasion presented to us? How is it used? That's what we're trying to do in this class. Okay, we're going to do a little bit of a break, jump back into our graphic novel, Why Rhetoric? So I would love for you to read this on your own. You can absolutely pause the video. Why Rhetoric? Aristotle lives. Piecing together a definition of rhetoric, reanimating ancient views of rhetoric, setting rhetorical concepts loose on the world. All right, chapter 1 is all I'm asking you to read in this lesson. If you were in class, boot camp, we would be doing this in class. As you're reading, there is another document, not very many questions, once again, on that document. As you're reading, or once you're done reading, please fill out the Google Doc that pair with this chapter, and then submit that Google Doc on Classroom. It's in there as an assignment. Again, these assignments are not graded, but they do help solidify a foundation on which I think will help you when we start officially with the new school year. Okay, if you want to pause the video or look at Google Classroom again, I don't have it posted yet, but it will be under Day 2 material. I'm going to post all of that here momentarily. Okay, moving on. Welcome back. Okay, the appeals. We're going to dive into ethos, logos, and pathos a little bit more in depth at this point. So Aristotle identified those three primary ways a speaker or writer can appeal to an audience to persuade them. These are known as the rhetorical appeals: ethos, pathos, logos. Those terms will be on the test. Talked about those in the last video. What they are, you need to be able to identify them and define them. These three appeals are often seen as the corners of the rhetorical triangle. We talked about that in the last video as well, illustrating their interconnectedness, how they work together to achieve persuasion. So that triangle, coming back to this, again, this will be on the test, we talked about in the last video, of being able to label this and reading a piece of text and identifying the writer, identifying the subject, identifying the audience. As a recap, this rhetorical triangle is a diagram that illustrates the interrelationship among the writer, audience, and subject of a text. Now, when you connect this to the appeals, what I want you to think about for a second here is which point is ethos used the most, which point is logos used the most, and which point is pathos used the most. Remember, ethos, appeal to credibility, that ethical tendency. Logos, logic, reason. Pathos, appeal to emotion. All right, well, if you're thinking that ethos would be the writer, you are correct. The writer, the person creating the text, uses ethos the most because they're the authority figure. They're the one who is writing this, and they're establishing that credibility through their text. The subject is logos. Logos is the subject. Through the subject is where you're going to use logic and reason the most. And then audience, they are using pathos the most in this triangle. The audience uses pathos the most out of these three. So ethos is the writer, logos is the subject, pathos is the audience. That aspect of the rhetorical triangle is not on the test. We'll examine that more in depth in class, but that is a part of Aristotle's rhetorical triangle. All right, ethos, this is on a test. So you may be given a passage, which you'll see here in a second, a scenario, and you'll be asked to demonstrate or label or identify how ethos is used. Ethos, credibility / character, a person's character. It's a testament to a person's character. The definition here, ethos, this is a more in-depth definition. The definition that's found on the previous video is perfectly fine for you to know on the test. But a more in-depth definition, ethos refers to the speaker's or writer's credibility, character, and authority. It's about convincing the audience that the source of the message is trustworthy, knowledgeable, and has good intentions. When a rhetor establishes strong ethos, the audience is more likely to believe what they're saying because they believe in the person saying it. How it's established, I know you covered this last year. You've probably covered this a few times. It's established through expertise, trustworthiness, reputation, shared values, professionalism. Our scenario, this is what might be on the test. You might be given a scenario, asked to identify how rhetorical appeals are used. As a medical doctor with 20 years of experience in infectious diseases, I can assure you that vaccinating your children is the most effective way to protect them from preventable illnesses. How is ethos used? I'm going to take a drink of a Topo Chico mineral water. All right, ethos, we've got that credibility, 20 years of experience. Well, if somebody does something for 20 years, especially in the medical field, you think that they know what they're talking about. Logos, logic. Our in-depth definition, logos refers to the appeal to logic and reason. It's about persuading an audience by using facts, statistics, evidence, logical reasoning, and clear, well-structured arguments. The aim is to make the message appear rational, sensible, and objectively sound, opposed to being subjective or biased. This is Plato's go-to. Plato liked logos. How it's established? Well, facts, statistics, expert testimony, a little bit of ethos there. Logical reasoning, analogies, comparisons, clear organization here, jumping all over. With logos for the test, the reason why you have all of this is when you are given a scenario, you kind of want to look for these things, right? You want to look for the facts, if there are any statistics, any expert testimony, quotes. Look for the organization, how it's organized. That's why this is on there. You're not going to be expected to memorize this exact definition, more so the how it's established. This is a scenario. Our research indicates that communities with robust after-school programs show a 25% reduction in juvenile crime rates and a 15% increase in high school graduation rates. Therefore, investing in these programs is a logical step toward improving community safety and educational outcomes. Scenario, straightforward. How is logos used in that scenario? Well, we've got some statistics there, right? 25% reduction, 15% in juvenile crime, 15% increase in high school graduation. Those are positives. We also have the phrasing logical step toward improving community safety. We, as the audience, are trusting this information. We're hoping they're not just making it up. So there is a bit of an issue there, but that's logos, using those statistics to try to prove the point. And last but not least, pathos. Definition. Our definition of pathos, appeal to emotion. Pathos refers to the appeal to the audience's emotions, values, beliefs, and imagination, creativity. The goal is to evoke a specific emotional response. We're looking for things like fear. You see that a lot in a number of advertisements. You see it a lot in politics, hear it a lot in politics. Sympathy, anger, joy, patriotism, sorrow, excitement. That moves the audience to agree with the message or take a desired action. One thing to consider is, what side are you on? Are you on Plato's side? Are you on Aristotle's side? Do you think that pathos and ethos, do you think using emotions like fear, sympathy, anger, joy, those types of emotional responses is good to use to master, or does that lead to manipulation? And how can we prevent that? Well, to answer that question is you have to be able to recognize it. I think practicing, taking classes like this, talking about this, you're more likely to recognize when somebody's using pathos in a negative way, in a manipulative way, rather than in a positive way. All right, I'll get off that's my little rant. How it's established, things you want to look for in the scenario or passage on the test. You want to look for vivid language, strong adjectives, descriptive words, imagery, figurative language. Remember on the last video, we had that freedom-crushing mandate opposed to just new regulation. Freedom-crushing is a powerful phrase. It evokes strong images in your head. Anecdotes and stories, personal stories that make it very relatable. Figurative language, specifically metaphors, similes, analogies. We'll talk about that. Talk about those terms more in the next video. Tone, employing a sympathetic, urgent, inspiring, or humorous tone. We talked about tone in the last video. And values, tapping into shared cultural values, hopes, or fears. All right. Pathos. Oops, I did not correct this. Caught myself. Appeal to emotion. Here's the scenario. Imagine waking up one day to find your home submerged, your memories floating away, and everything you've ever known lost to the rising tides. This is the terrifying reality facing countless families if we don't act now on climate change. How is pathos used in that passage? Think. Well, starts off going after your imagination. Imagine. The picture that's painted is well done, right? I mean, it's clear. It's a terrifying thought. He even uses the word terrifying, right? Negative connotation. It's a negative word, denotation as well. Your memories floating away, right? Personification there. Everything you've ever known lost to the rising tides, that strong image. And then it throws the pitch, the argument at the end. Right? We're all on board that that's a terrifying scenario, and then we get to the pitch. The pitch at the end is, if we don't act now on climate change. That's how pathos, one way of how pathos is used. You see pathos a lot in advertising and politics. You see it in everyday conversations. When you're talking with your friends and you're trying to maybe persuade them in some way, whether you know it or not, you may be using these techniques. But pathos, appealing to emotion, playing to someone's emotions, is used quite often. Okay, identifying the appeals in action. What I'd like you to do, we have a few speeches, political speeches, from I think the last 10 or 15 or 20 years. Pick one of the 3 political speeches on Google Classroom. Identify elements of ethos, logos, or pathos in that speech. Be ready to explain your identification if asked, if you were in class. Now, obviously, you're not in class, you're watching this. If you find time to do this on your own, just read through the speech, see if you can identify ethos, logos, pathos, and elements, because that's what you'll be asked to do on the test. Submit that document once finished, either print it off or submit it on Classroom. That will be as an assignment on Classroom. If you look, these are those speeches. We have one from Barack Obama, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, more than 20 years. That was back in the in the 40s. We have George H.W. Bush, so that's not George W. Bush. That's his father in the early 90s. Those are three different speeches from three very different candidates, three very different time periods. Pick one of those, whichever one piques your interest, and look for those rhetorical appeals. Again, the point of that is on the test, you'll be asked to do something similar. You won't have to read a long form speech necessarily, but you will be asked to identify the appeals. Okay, let's jump back in to this character. 8 terms for argumentation. Here we go. Number 1, a term that I would like you to know, a qualifier. So these are terms used to argue, to build an argument. More so, not necessarily specifically in the rhetorical world. That was more the first video. Today it's about argumentation. The next video is about literary devices. So the definition, this is what you need to know on the test, a word or phrase that limits the strength of the claim. It shows nuance and strengthens ethos. Why is it important to know this? Well, using qualifiers shows nuance and strengthens ethos by acknowledging that the claim may not be universally true. That builds some sort of trust and credibility. Example, quote, year-round schooling often improves student outcomes. This plan will likely lead to cost savings. The words often and likely are qualifiers, right? It leaves some room, some wiggle room. It doesn't make it an absolute. Saying those words, including those words, kind of builds trust and credibility in that you're not trying to say that you know everything and that this is a fail-safe improvement or change, but it says that not always, but often improves student outcomes. And it may not lead to cost savings, but it likely will. Using those qualifiers helps build ethos. Antithesis, our second term. It's the juxtaposition of contrasting ideas, kind of the opposite, opposing ideas, often in balanced parallel phrases or clauses. It sets up an opposition between two ideas to create a striking effect, a powerful effect. Why is it important to use antithesis or to be able to recognize antithesis? Well, it clarifies an argument by drawing sharp distinctions and emphasizing the contrast between those ideas. The balanced structure makes the phrase more memorable and impactful. Quote, one of the more famous lines from literature, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. That is an example of an antithesis used in the literary sense. All right, moving along, rebuttal. Sure heard this term before. Rebuttal, if I may rebut, please. Our third term, it's a response to a counter-argument. Opposing viewpoint or a specific claim which aims to contradict, refute, or weaken it by presenting evidence or a counter-argument. So it's not the comeback, but it's somebody presents a claim and you can rebut that claim. We'll get into what the difference between rebuttal and refuting is. We'll get into counter-arguments more specifically. One way that this is often taught is that you make a claim, somebody makes a counter-argument, and then you make a rebuttal to that counter-argument. But what you need to know is that this is just addressing somebody else's claim, trying to prove it wrong. A response to a counter-argument is probably the easiest way to remember this term, rebuttal. Why is it important to know what a rebuttal is? Well, it strengthens your argument. That's what we're talking about here, argumentation. It addresses the audience's concerns, demonstrates critical thinking. It's preemptive oftentimes. You try to say something or mention something that has yet to be mentioned by the opposition. An example, so we have an opposing view. Some argue that extending the school day would only lead to increased student fatigue and burnout. However, this is the rebuttal. Studies from districts that have successfully implemented longer days show that by incorporating more varied activities and structured breaks, student engagement actually improves and burnout rates remain stable or even decrease. So we present the claim and then we rebut that claim immediately. My wife just texted me to take the clothes out of the dryer now. Induction or inductive reasoning. Our fourth term, our definition for induction, a form of logical reasoning that moves from specific observation, facts, or examples to arrive at a general conclusion or principle. Why is it important to know this? It's based in everyday reasoning, right? It's what we observe and we see, well, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening, well, then this must be happening. It includes several pieces of evidence. It establishes credibility through that consistent observation. An example, which is probably the easiest way to remember what induction means, to be inductive. Every time, quote, every time I've eaten at Pizza Planet, the pizza has been delicious. My friend also says their pizza is always great. The online reviews for Pizza Planet consistently praise their food. Well, my inductive conclusion, therefore, Pizza Planet probably makes consistently delicious pizza. I've got enough observable things that I can clearly make this conclusion, the statement. That's called inductive reasoning. Someone's mowing. Oh, jeez. Okay, I had to close the window. The mower was too loud. Induction. So what you want to know for the test regarding this term is that it's just a form of logical reasoning based on consistent observations. Another simple example is you look outside, you see everybody wearing coats, you see the flags blowing, the wind blowing hard, you see snow falling down. You can make the inductive reasoning, you can make the conclusion that it's cold outside based on that. That is using your observations to build a conclusion, to lead to a conclusion. Next term, and I actually meant to take this off. This term will be on the test, but the next term will not be. Sorry. So the next term is a fun word, syllogism. Syllogism is a form of deductive reasoning, which we'll talk about in a second. It consists of three major parts. So you math fans, this is basically an equation. A plus B equals C. We have a major premise, which is your general statement, a minor premise, a specific statement related to that major premise, and then a conclusion. So major, minor, and conclusion. This is the most basic structure of deductive reasoning. Reveals assumptions and arguments, helps with critical evaluation. So an example where this deductive reasoning is used, where syllogism is used, our major premise, all mammals are warm-blooded. Minor premise, a whale is a mammal. Conclusion, therefore, a whale is warm-blooded. That's true. The premises are accepted. I accepted the major premise and the minor premise. Both of those premises are true. So the conclusion, therefore, is accepted as well. A male is warm-blooded, which is true. Deduction. This is not going to be on the test because deduction and deductive reasoning, they're the same. I would like to talk about it a little bit more in class, and we'll get to it more as the semester goes on. Deduction is another form of logical reasoning, similar to induction and inductive reasoning, but it moves from a general premise or principle to a specific certain conclusion. Now, this is the important part. This is where it gets a little tricky. If the premises are true, the conclusion must logically follow. If the premises are true. The issue is, a lot of times the premises are not true. For example, in this cartoon, penguins are black and white. That's our major premise. Minor premise, some old TV shows are black and white. Conclusion, therefore, some penguins are old TV shows. It's not true. That's a logical fallacy, is what that's called. Deduction produces logical soundness when the premises are correct. It allows for precise and definitive conclusions if those initial premises are accepted. If they're not accepted, though, it leads to a fallacy. This is an example of a logical fallacy. It's called a modus ponens. If it is raining, then the streets are wet. It is raining. So our major premise, if it is raining, the streets are wet. Our minor premise, it is raining. Therefore, the streets are wet. The reason why that you can't accept that is because many streets are not exposed to weather conditions. Many streets are in tunnels or are covered. Not all streets receive the same amount of rain or any rain, depending on where they're located. So that is an incorrect version called modus ponens. There are issues with that deduction. Okay, our second to last term, logical fallacy. Do you make these mistakes in reasoning? So a logical fallacy is just an error in reasoning that renders an argument invalid or unsound. Fallacies are deceptive and misleading arguments that, despite seeming logical, they're based on faulty reasoning or irrelevant points. It's important to recognize logical fallacies. You see them and hear them a lot. Critical reading, stronger writing, more informed citizenship. Politics specifically uses logical fallacies often. An example of a logical fallacy. Well, my neighbor's dog barks constantly, and the dog down the street growls at everyone. Therefore, you know what? All dogs are aggressive and noisy. This is not correct. However, you hear that type of verbiage used a lot in our everyday language communication, whether it's politics, whether it's, pop culture, even just in casual conversation. You hear these kind of hasty generalizations. That's what that is, because the conclusion about all dogs is drawn from too few specific non-representative examples. So that's a logical fallacy, a simple one. All right, our last term, concession. Concede, I concede, I concede, I'm done. You win. An acknowledgement of some validity in an opponent's point or a part of their argument. The reason why this is an important term to know is, yes, you can concede an entire argument. That happens often. But you can also concede specific parts of an argument without conceding the entire thing. So you can acknowledge that, yes, you're correct here. I will give you that. It's a valid point. But you're incorrect here. And when you do that, when you make those kind of minor concessions in an argument, it builds credibility on your end, and it helps your argument, essentially. Okay, so builds that ethos, that establishes some credibility on your part. It preempts objections. It fosters that common ground where you can find some agreement, and it strengthens your argument. An example, I agree that the new parking regulations will cause some initial inconvenience for commuters, but, so that's my concession, also have that qualifier, some, but the long-term benefits of reduced traffic and improved air quality far outweigh these temporary drawbacks. So I give you a little concession, but then I offer somewhat of a rebuttal to that concession, to the main point immediately after. It's very effective. Okay, what to remember for the test? Let me adjust this, as I'm taking deduction or deductive reasoning off of this test simply because it can be a little tricky. So you don't need to worry about that for the test. So your rhetorical appeals, you need to be able to identify them. You need to be able to, have a passage or a scenario. You need to identify certain rhetorical appeals. The terms you need to know: qualifier, antithesis, rebuttal, induction or inductive reasoning. They're in the same: syllogism, concession, and logical fallacy. Okay, that's it. That was a shorter video. That wasn't too terrible. If you have any questions, let me know. And just one more video to go. Okay, I'm going to stop there.